If your mind feels like a crowded temple tonight, filled with the echoes of 1,000 voices telling you what to believe, what to think, what to hold sacred, pause here with me. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. You have arrived at a place where you can finally set down the weight of certainty, the burden of knowing, the exhaustion of defending what you think must be true. If you find comfort in this space and wish to return here for rest, I invite you to subscribe to our community of seekers who gather not to find answers, but to rest in the questions themselves. Tonight, we explore a paradox that has puzzled and liberated countless souls across centuries. Buddhism, the religion of no religion. How can something be both a path and the abandonment of all paths? How can a teaching exist that tells you to let go of all teachings? This is not a riddle to solve with your thinking mind. It is a truth to be felt in the quiet spaces between your thoughts, in the moments when you stop trying to grasp and simply allow yourself to be. In the ancient texts, the Buddha himself warned against making an idol of his words. He spoke of his teachings as a raft, useful for crossing the river, but absurd to carry on your back once you reach the other shore. Imagine that for a moment. You struggle across turbulent waters, clinging to a raft of wood and rope. It saves your life. But when you finally reach solid ground, would you hoist that heavy raft onto your shoulders and carry it with you into the mountains? Would you sleep with it, eat with it, define yourself by it? Of course not. Yet this is what we do with beliefs, with identities, with the structures we think define us. The religion of no religion does not ask you to believe in nothing. Rather, it invites you to hold your beliefs lightly, like a bird holds the air beneath its wings, present, supportive, but never grasped. When you clench your fist around air, you have nothing. When you open your hand, the whole sky is yours. This is the first teaching that will carry us through this night, that freedom comes not from acquiring the right beliefs, but from releasing your grip on all beliefs. There was once a young scholar who traveled many months to study with a renowned Zen master. This scholar had read every Buddhist text, memorized countless sutras, and could debate the finest points of doctrine with remarkable precision. He arrived at the master's simple dwelling with scrolls under his arms and pride in his heart. The master invited him in for tea. As they sat together, the scholar began to speak about his extensive knowledge, his understanding of emptiness, his grasp of the middle way. The master listened in silence, slowly pouring tea into the scholar's cup. He poured, and even as the cup filled to the brim, he continued pouring. Tea spilled over the edges, across the table, into the scholar's lap. The scholar jumped up, startled and confused. "Master, can't you see the cup is full? No more will go in." The master set down the teapot and smiled gently. "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This story reveals something essential about the nature of the pathless path. We arrive at wisdom's door carrying so much: our education, our experiences, our carefully constructed understanding of how things should be. We knock on that door, expecting to add more knowledge to our collection, like acquiring rare treasures to store in an already crowded room. But the door opens only when we are willing to set everything down, to come empty-handed into the present moment. What does it mean to practice a religion that asks you to relinquish religion itself? In Christianity, there is God. In Islam, there is Allah. In Hinduism, there is Brahman. But in Buddhism, there is a profound silence where you might expect to find a creator deity. The Buddha refused to answer questions about the existence of God, about what happens after death, about the nature of the eternal. Why? Not because he didn't know, but because these questions he understood are the wrong questions. They are questions the thinking mind asks to avoid the work of waking up right now, right here, in this breath, in this moment of existence that is already complete. You see, the thinking mind loves projects. It loves something to work toward, something to achieve, some distant shore where enlightenment waits like a prize at the end of a long race. But Buddhism turns this impulse on its head. It suggests that you are already standing on the shore. You have always been standing on the shore. The journey you thought you needed to make is revealed as unnecessary. The person you thought you needed to become is shown to be a fiction. What remains when all the becoming stops? Just this. Just breathing. Just being. Just the extraordinary ordinariness of existence itself, which somehow, miraculously, is enough. The moon does not try to be beautiful. The mountain does not strive to be tall. Water does not work hard at flowing downhill. Yet each expresses its nature perfectly, without effort, without becoming anything other than what it is. This is the wisdom that flows through Buddhism like a river flows to the sea. Not because it should, not because someone commanded it, but because flowing is its nature. When we try to force ourselves to be spiritual, to be enlightened, to be anything other than what we are in this moment, we create suffering. We become like that river trying to flow uphill, exhausting ourselves in resistance to our own nature. In the Zen tradition, they speak of original face, the face you had before your parents were born. This beautiful metaphor points to something that exists before all the conditioning, before all the stories you've been told about who you are, before the names and roles and identities that layer themselves upon the naked awareness that is your true nature. What if you could meet yourself there, in that spacious place before all the becoming? What if you already are what you've been seeking? There was a monk named Bodhidharma who traveled from India to China, bringing with him the essence of Buddhist meditation. When he arrived, the Emperor Wu, a devout Buddhist who had built many temples and sponsored countless monks, asked him eagerly, "I have built temples, copied sacred texts, and ordained monks. What merit have I accumulated?" The emperor expected praise, acknowledgement of his good deeds, confirmation of his spiritual status. But Bodhidharma looked at him with eyes like clear water and said simply, "No merit whatsoever." The emperor was stunned. "What then is the sacred truth?" he asked. Bodhidharma replied, "Vast emptiness, nothing sacred." The emperor, deeply confused, asked one final question. "Who then stands before me?" And Bodhidharma answered, "I don't know." I don't know. 3 words that contain more wisdom than 1,000 books of doctrine. In our world, we are trained to know, to be certain, to have answers. We feel embarrassed by not knowing, as though it reveals some deficiency in us. But Bodhidharma's "I don't know" is not ignorance. It is wisdom, recognizing the limits of conceptual understanding. It is the mind that has become comfortable with mystery, that doesn't need to wrap everything in neat explanations, that can rest in the unknowable nature of existence itself. This comfort with not knowing is radical in our certainty-obsessed culture. We live in an age where everyone has opinions about everything, where certainty is valued more than curiosity, where we surround ourselves with people who confirm what we already believe rather than challenging us to question our assumptions. Buddhism asks us to step outside this fortress of certainty and into the open air of direct experience, unmediated by belief. Consider how much energy you expend maintaining your beliefs, defending them, justifying them, finding evidence for them, surrounding yourself with people who share them. It's exhausting, isn't it? Like holding up a great weight, day after day, never able to rest because the moment you set it down, the identity built around those beliefs begins to dissolve. What if you could just set it down? What if, just for tonight, you could release the need to be right, to have the answers, to know how things are? What if you could breathe into that vast space of not knowing and discover it isn't frightening at all, but rather infinitely spacious, like a sky that has been waiting for you all along? The religion of no religion doesn't ask you to replace your beliefs with different beliefs. It invites you to notice the one who believes, the awareness that exists before any belief arises. When you were a child, before language shaped your world into categories and concepts, there was a direct experience of existence, pure, immediate, uncomplicated by interpretation. A flower was not beautiful or red or even flower. It was just raw presence, meeting your raw presence, and in that meeting there was no separation, no subject and object, just experience itself, arising and passing like waves in the ocean. We spend our lives learning to see the world through the lens of language and concept. This is necessary for functioning in society, for communicating, for navigating the practical dimensions of existence. But somewhere along the way, we forget that the lens is not the reality. We mistake the map for the territory, the menu for the meal, the word for the thing itself. Buddhism offers practices that help us see through the lens, to return again and again to direct experience, to what the Zen masters call just this breath flowing in and out of your body without any effort from you, just this sound arising in awareness and dissolving again, just this sensation, this thought appearing and disappearing like a cloud crossing the sky. When you rest in just this, without adding stories or interpretations, something extraordinary happens. The burden of maintaining a separate self begins to lighten. The boundaries between inside and outside start to blur. You begin to sense that you are not an isolated thing in the universe, but rather the universe expressing itself in this particular form, in this particular moment. There is an ancient story about a fish who swam through the vast ocean searching everywhere for water. She asked every creature she met, "Where can I find this water I keep hearing about?" She swam to the deepest depths and rose to the sunlit surface, always seeking, always searching, never realizing she was surrounded by the very thing she sought. We are like that fish, searching for enlightenment, for truth, for peace, never recognizing that we are already swimming in it, that it is the very medium in which we exist, that our search itself is the only thing preventing us from recognizing what has always been here. This is the essential paradox at the heart of Buddhist practice. There is nothing to attain and nowhere to go, yet the practice matters. There is no one to become enlightened, yet transformation happens. How can both be true? The thinking mind recoils from paradox. It wants clean categories, clear answers, logical consistency. But reality, in its fullness, doesn't bow to the mind's desire for tidiness. It contains multitudes, holds contradictions, embraces what seems impossible from the perspective of dualistic thinking. In the Heart Sutra, one of Buddhism's most beloved texts, we find these stunning words: "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Not form or emptiness, but form is emptiness." These are not two separate things, but two ways of seeing the same reality. The solid table in front of you is emptiness, mostly space, atoms dancing in void, completely interdependent with everything else, nothing separate, nothing solid, nothing permanent. Yet it is also undeniably form, useful, present, able to hold your teacup, able to be measured and touched and experienced. Both are true simultaneously. This is the wisdom that transcends contradiction. When you begin to see in this way, religion itself becomes empty, not meaningless, but empty of inherent fixed essence. Christianity is empty. Buddhism is empty. Atheism is empty. They are all forms that arise from emptiness, expressions of the human heart's longing to understand its place in the mystery of existence. To cling to any of them as absolute truth is to miss the point entirely. To reject all of them as foolish is equally to miss the point. They are fingers pointing at the moon, and some of us need to follow different fingers. But none of the fingers are the moon itself. The Buddha taught for 45 years, yet he also said that in all that time, he never taught a single thing. How can this be? Because he understood that true teaching cannot be transmitted through words. Words can point, suggest, evoke, but the realization itself must arise from within. From direct seeing, from the moment when something shifts, and you suddenly understand with your whole being what no amount of explanation could convey. It's like trying to describe the taste of honey to someone who has never tasted sweetness. You can use all the poetic language in the world, but until that person tastes honey directly, they will never truly know. This is why Buddhism emphasizes practice over belief. You could read every Buddhist text ever written, memorize all the teachings, understand all the philosophy, and still be no closer to liberation than when you started. But sit in meditation for 10 minutes. Really sit. Really allow yourself to be present with what is, and something begins to shift. Not because you're doing it right or achieving some special state, but because in that simple act of sitting, you step outside the constant stream of becoming and allow yourself to simply be. Let yourself feel that now, even as you listen. You don't have to change anything, fix anything, become anything. Just notice that you are aware. Awareness is here, receiving these words, hearing these sounds, being the space in which all experience arises. That awareness doesn't belong to you. Rather, you arise within it, like a wave arises within the ocean. The wave can be named, measured, photographed, but it is never separate from the ocean. It is the ocean taking a particular form for a brief moment before dissolving back into the vastness from which it came. When the great Zen master Dogen was asked, "What is enlightenment?" he answered, "It is simply being intimate with all things." Not achieving some altered state, not gaining special powers or mystical visions, but intimacy, being fully present with life as it unfolds, without the barrier of separation that the separate self creates. The separate self is always standing back, evaluating, judging, comparing, trying to figure out if this moment meets its standards. Intimacy means there is no one standing back. There is just this moment, living itself through you, as you. Think about the times in your life when you felt most fully alive. Perhaps you were watching a sunset and suddenly the sense of being a separate observer fell away, and there was just the seeing. No seer and seen, just the pure act of seeing itself. Or you were listening to music and got lost in it, forgot yourself completely, and something in you opened like a flower to the sun. Or you were with someone you love, and in a moment of complete presence, the boundaries dissolved, and you couldn't tell where you ended and they began. These moments of intimacy are glimpses of our true nature, which is never separate, never isolated, never really bound within the limits we imagine define us. The religion of no religion asks you to question everything, including the questioner. Who is it that seeks liberation? Who is it that wants to be enlightened? When you look closely, when you really investigate this sense of being a separate self, something remarkable begins to happen. The more you look, the less you find. You find thoughts, but thoughts come and go. Are you the thoughts? You find sensations, but sensations constantly change. Are you the sensations? You find memories, but memories shift and fade. Are you the memories? What remains when you strip away all the things you are not? Not nothing, but no thing. Awareness itself, pure presence, the witnessing consciousness that has been here all along, unchanged by the endless parade of experiences passing through it. This witnessing awareness is not personal. It doesn't belong to you any more than the sky belongs to the clouds that pass through it. Right now, someone in China is looking at the same moon you might see tonight. The light traveling from that moon touches both your eyes and theirs, connects you across distance in a web of relationship that existed before you were born and will continue after you die. You are not separate from that Chinese person, from the moon, from the light traveling between you. You are all part of one seamless whole, temporarily experiencing itself from different perspectives, like an infinite jewel reflecting itself in its countless facets. But the mind trained in Western individualism recoils from this. We've been taught that we are separate, isolated individuals competing for limited resources, needing to defend our boundaries and assert our independence. This teaching creates tremendous suffering. It makes us lonely in a crowd, disconnected from the living earth, alienated from our own deeper nature. Buddhism offers an antidote to this suffering, not by telling you what to believe, but by inviting you to look directly at your experience and see what is actually true. There was a student who came to a Zen master in great distress. "Master," she said, "I have been practicing meditation for 3 years, but I have made no progress. I still get angry. I still feel afraid. I still have desires. When will I finally achieve enlightenment?" The master looked at her with infinite kindness and asked, "Where is this person who has made no progress? Show her to me." The student was confused. I am that person," she stammered. "You," the master said. "I see only awareness, only presence, only this moment appearing and disappearing. Where is this person you speak of? Is she in your leg, your arm, your thoughts, your feelings? Point to her. Show me where she exists." The student sat in silence, looking, searching for this person she had always assumed she was. But the more she looked, the less she found. There were thoughts about being a person, feelings associated with identity, memories that created a sense of continuity, but no actual solid, separate self anywhere to be found. In that moment of looking and not finding, something relaxed in her. The one who needed to achieve enlightenment was revealed as a fiction, a story, a habitual pattern of thought, and in recognizing this, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the burden she had been carrying suddenly revealed itself to be made of nothing but air. This is the liberation that Buddhism points toward. Not freedom through achievement, but freedom through recognition. Freedom not for someone, but freedom from the illusion that there is someone separate who needs to be free. It sounds like double talk to the conceptual mind, like meaningless spiritual gibberish. But to the heart that has tasted even a moment of this recognition, it is more real than anything the world of objects can offer. The world of objects, including objects called Buddhism, enlightenment, meditation, spiritual practice, this is the world of form, forever changing, forever incomplete, forever promising fulfillment, but never quite delivering. Not because there's anything wrong with the world of form, but because fulfillment cannot be found in any object, in any experience, in any state, no matter how pleasant or profound. Why? Because fulfillment is what you already are, prior to all states, prior to all experiences, prior to the division of reality into subject and object, seeker and sought. Imagine a sunbeam searching for the sun. It travels across continents, pierces through clouds, illuminates countless objects, always asking, "Where is the sun? I must find the sun." Of course, it never occurs to the sunbeam that it is the sun. Expressed in this particular form, that it has never been separate from its source, that every atom of its light is sunlight, sun essence, sun nature. We are like that sunbeam, consciousness, searching for consciousness, looking for being, already and always what we seek, unable to find it because we are too busy looking, too busy searching, too convinced that we need to go somewhere, do something, become someone. The religion of no religion invites you to stop, not forever, not as a new rule or rigid practice, but just for this moment. Stop searching, stop becoming, stop trying to get somewhere other than here, to be someone other than what you are. In this stopping, something is revealed. Not something new, but something that has always been here, like the silence that has always been present beneath the noise. The stillness that holds all movement, the peace that exists prior to the disturbance of seeking. Can you feel it now? Even reading these words, even thinking about these ideas, there is a silent awareness holding it all. That awareness is not disturbed by thoughts. It doesn't come and go with feelings. It doesn't improve when you meditate or decline when you don't. It is simply here, now and always, the constant factor in every moment of your existence. Some call it Buddha nature. Some call it consciousness. Some call it presence or being or the self. But names don't touch it. It exists before all names, before all concepts, before the mind learned to divide reality into categories and create the illusion of separation. In Tibet, there is a practice of making intricate sand mandalas. Beautiful, geometric patterns created grain by grain over days or weeks. Monks spend countless hours in deep concentration, placing each coloured sand particle with precision and care, creating a masterpiece of sacred art. Then, when the mandala is complete, they sweep it up and pour the sand into a river. All that work, all that beauty, return to formlessness in moments. This is not nihilism or disrespect for the creative process. It is a teaching about impermanence, about non-attachment, about the true nature of all forms. They arise, they display their unique beauty, and they dissolve, like waves rising from the ocean and falling back into it. We resist this truth with every fibre of our being. We want to make things last. We want to hold on to pleasant experiences, preserve our youth, keep our loved ones close forever. Stop time in its tracks when life feels good, and this resistance creates the fabric of our suffering. Not the change itself, but our fight against it, our refusal to accept that everything that arises must also pass, that form and emptiness are not enemies, but dance partners in the great choreography of existence. Buddhism teaches that there are three marks of existence: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Everything changes. Clinging to what changes creates suffering. And there is no unchanging, permanent self at the center of experience. Only the flow of experience itself, appearing moment by moment, like frames in a movie, creating the illusion of continuity. When you first hear these teachings, they can sound depressing, nihilistic, like they're taking away everything that makes life meaningful. But stay with them. Let them sink deeper. Something shifts when you stop resisting these truths and start allowing them to inform how you meet each moment. Imagine you're holding a bird in your hands. If you squeeze too tightly, you'll crush it. If you open your hands completely, it will fly away. But there's a way of holding, gently, openly, allowing the bird to rest in your palms without grasping, that honors both your desire to connect with the bird and the bird's nature to be free. This is how we can learn to hold everything in life: relationships, possessions, beliefs, even our sense of self, not grasping, not abandoning, but holding lightly, with open hands, with a heart that can love deeply without demanding that what it loves remain unchanged. There was once a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors came to express their sympathy. "Such bad luck," they said. The farmer simply replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing with it 3 wild horses. The neighbors congratulated him on his good fortune. "Such good luck," they exclaimed. The farmer said only, "Maybe." The following day, his son tried to ride one of the wild horses and was thrown, breaking his leg. Again, the neighbors came to offer condolences. "Such bad luck," they said. "Maybe," said the farmer. The next week, military officers came to the village to conscript young men for war, but they passed over the farmer's son because of his broken leg. "Such good luck," said the neighbors. The farmer looked at them and said, "Maybe." This story illustrates a profound truth about the nature of judgment and the stories we tell about our experiences. We are constantly labeling things as good or bad, wanted or unwanted, success or failure. But these labels arise from a very limited perspective, from not being able to see the larger pattern, from not understanding how everything is interconnected in ways our conceptual mind cannot grasp. The farmer's wisdom was to hold his judgments lightly, to recognize that what appears one way in the moment might reveal itself differently over time, that every ending contains a beginning, every loss opens a space for something new. This doesn't mean we become passive or stop caring about outcomes. It means we stop adding unnecessary suffering to our pain. Pain is inevitable. Bodies age, people die, circumstances change in ways we don't prefer. But suffering, the mental and emotional anguish we create through our stories, judgments, and resistance to what is, this is optional. This is what Buddhism addresses. Not the pain of existence, but the suffering we add to pain through our relationship with it. When physical pain arises, for example, notice what happens. First, there is sensation: sharp, dull, burning, aching. This is just sensation, neither good nor bad in itself. Then the mind comes in with its commentary. This shouldn't be happening. What if it gets worse? What if it never goes away? Why is my body failing me? Now you have pain plus fear plus anger plus worry, a whole cascade of suffering piled on top of the original sensation. But what if you could relate to the sensation differently? What if you could notice it, acknowledge it, maybe even get curious about its qualities without adding all the stories? The sensation remains, but the suffering, the mental anguish, begins to dissolve. This is practical spirituality, not abstract philosophy. This is Buddhism as a living practice that changes your relationship with every moment of existence. And notice, it doesn't require you to believe anything. You don't have to accept reincarnation or karma or any metaphysical claims. You can test these teachings directly in your own experience. Sit with discomfort without trying to fix it or push it away. Notice what happens. Watch a judgment arise in your mind, and instead of believing it, just note it. Judging. Observe the thought pass like a cloud. Try relating to your experience without the constant commentary of like and dislike. See for yourself what this creates. The Buddha called his teaching the middle way, not because it's moderate or wishy-washy, but because it navigates between extremes that both lead to suffering. On one side is indulgence, the belief that pleasure and satisfaction come from fulfilling every desire, from getting what you want, from arranging circumstances to match your preferences. On the other side is asceticism, the belief that liberation comes from denying the body, rejecting the world, transcending the physical through sheer force of will and renunciation. The Buddha tried both paths to their extremes and found neither led to freedom. Before his awakening, when he was still Prince Siddhartha, he lived in luxury, sheltered from the realities of aging, sickness, and death. He had everything the material world could offer: wealth, beauty, pleasure, power. Yet something in him felt the inadequacy of this life, sensed that no amount of pleasant experience could fill the existential emptiness at the center of conditioned existence. So he left his palace, abandoned his family, and took up the life of an ascetic. He practiced extreme austerities, fasting until his body was just skin and bones, meditating for days without moving, pushing himself to the very edge of death. Yet enlightenment remained elusive. The self he was trying to transcend through punishment of the body proved just as present in asceticism as it had been in luxury. Finally, emaciated and exhausted, he accepted a bowl of rice milk from a young woman. As he drank, strength returned to his body, and with it a crucial insight. Neither indulgence nor denial is the path. Both are forms of violence, one against the world, one against oneself. Both arise from the same root, the belief that happiness lies somewhere other than here, in some modification of present experience. True peace, he intuited, must be found not by changing circumstances, but by changing relationship to circumstances, not by getting what you want, but by understanding the nature of wanting itself. That night, he sat beneath a tree and vowed not to rise until he understood the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. He sat through the night, and as morning approached, something shifted. The separate self he had taken to be real was revealed as a construction, a habit of thought, an activity rather than an entity. In that recognition, suffering ended, not because conditions became perfect, but because the one who needed perfect conditions was seen through as illusion. He sat there, beneath what would come to be called the Bodhi tree, the awakened one, the Buddha, no longer seeking anything, no longer trying to become anything, simply present with what is, and finding in that presence an unshakable peace that didn't depend on anything external. For the rest of his life, He tried to point others toward this recognition. But how do you describe something that exists beyond description? How do you use words to point to what exists before words? This is why Buddhism developed so many different practices, so many different approaches. Some people need meditation practices to quiet the mind. Others need philosophical inquiry to see through illusions. Some need devotional practices to soften the heart. Others need service to others to break down the walls of separation. There is no single path because there is no actual distance to traverse, only recognition to occur, and recognition happens differently for different temperaments. The religion of no religion means Buddhism has no orthodoxy in the way Western religions often do. There is no Buddhist pope declaring what is true doctrine. There is no single text that all Buddhists must accept. There are many schools, many approaches, many interpretations, and this diversity is not seen as a problem to be solved, but as a natural expression of the teaching's adaptability. Buddhism flows into different cultures and takes on local color. Like water poured into different vessels, takes the shape of each container, while remaining essentially water. In Tibet, Buddhism merged with the indigenous Bon religion and produced Vajrayana, with its elaborate rituals, colorful thangkas, and practices involving visualization of deities. In China, it encountered Taoism and produced Chan, which later became Zen in Japan, stripped down, minimalist, emphasizing direct experience over intellectual understanding. In Southeast Asia, it remained closer to the original teachings, producing the Theravada tradition with its emphasis on the monastic path and careful preservation of the earliest texts. None of these is correct Buddhism. Each is Buddhism expressing itself through a particular cultural lens, like white light passing through a prism to create a rainbow of colors. This flexibility, this willingness to adapt while maintaining essential insights, is part of what makes Buddhism a religion of no religion. It doesn't claim exclusive truth. It doesn't condemn other paths as false. The Dalai Lama often says that the best religion for you is the one you were born into, assuming you practice it sincerely and it leads you toward greater compassion and wisdom. Buddhism is offered not as the only way, but as a way useful for those it speaks to, irrelevant for those it doesn't. This humility is rare among religious traditions and speaks to something deep in the Buddhist understanding of reality. If reality is ultimately beyond concept, then any conceptual system, including Buddhism, can only be provisional, a useful fiction, a finger pointing at the moon, but never the moon itself. To claim that Buddhism alone has the truth would be to miss the entire point of the teaching, which is that truth cannot be captured in any system, any belief, any formulation. It can only be directly realized, moment by moment, in the immediacy of present experience, when the mind stops its constant commentary and simply allows what is to be as it is. Allow yourself to settle more deeply now, to feel the surface of your body where it meets the air, where it touches the bed or chair beneath you. Notice how there is no actual boundary, no clear line where you end and not you begins. The air touches your skin, enters your lungs, becomes your breath, part of your body, then leaves again to join the world. Where is the separation? The food you ate yesterday is now your cells, your energy, your thoughts. The sun's light from millions of miles away enables the plants that create the oxygen you breathe and the food you eat. Are you separate from the sun? From the plants? From the complex web of relationships that makes your existence possible? The teaching of interdependence, called dependent origination in Buddhist philosophy, is not just an interesting idea, but a direct perception available in any moment of real attention. Nothing exists independently. Everything is contingent on countless conditions coming together in just the right way. The cup on your table depends on clay, on water, on the potter's parents, on the economic system that made pottery a viable profession, on the physics that allows solid objects to exist, on the history of the universe that created the atoms comprising the clay. To say cup is to name one small node in an infinite web of relationships extending across space and time in all directions. The cup is empty of independent existence, not because it doesn't exist, but because its existence is entirely relational, entirely contingent, entirely interconnected with everything else. You too are empty in this sense. Your body is made of food, water, air, light, gifts from the earth and sun. Your mind is made of language, concepts, memories, gifts from your family and culture. Your consciousness itself is not separate from the consciousness that animates all beings, that expresses itself in infinite forms. You are like a wave in the ocean, simultaneously distinct and not separate, both an individual expression and part of the vast undivided whole. To realize this is not to lose your individuality, but to understand its true nature, not as isolation, but as a unique perspective within an interconnected whole. This understanding naturally gives rise to compassion. When you deeply recognize that you are not separate from others, that their suffering is not fundamentally different from your suffering, that the boundary between self and other is conceptual rather than real, then kindness becomes as natural as breathing. You don't have to force yourself to care about others. Don't have to adopt compassion as an ethical obligation imposed from outside. Compassion arises spontaneously from recognition of non-separation, like your right hand naturally helps your left hand when it's injured, not because it should, but because there's no real division between them. The Bodhisattva ideal in Mahayana Buddhism expresses this beautifully. A Bodhisattva is one who vows not to enter final nirvana until all beings are liberated from suffering. This sounds like an impossible task. How could you liberate all beings? But it's not meant as a realistic goal to achieve. It's an expression of the recognition that there is no separate self to be liberated. Your liberation and the liberation of all beings are not two different things. When the illusion of separation dissolves, when you wake up from the dream of being an isolated individual, you recognize that you are not separate from the beggar on the street, the bird in the tree, the criminal in prison, the saint in meditation. All are consciousness exploring itself, being experiencing itself, emptiness taking countless forms. Does this mean individual suffering doesn't matter? No, precisely the opposite. It means all suffering matters equally because there is no fundamental difference between yours and mine. The pain you feel, I feel, because the you and I are conventions useful for navigating daily life, but not ultimately real in the way we habitually assume. This is why genuine spiritual realization naturally expresses itself in service, in care for others, in work to reduce suffering wherever it appears. Not from duty or obligation, but from simple recognition of what is true. There was a Zen master who had achieved great realization and lived simply in a small temple. One night, thieves broke in searching for valuables. The master had nothing to steal, but when the thieves were leaving, he called out to them, "You came all this way. You should not leave empty-handed." He took off his robe and offered it to them. The confused thieves took it and fled. The master sat down naked and looked at the moon rising through the window. "Poor fellows," he murmured. "I wish I could give them this beautiful moon." This is the spontaneous generosity that arises from non-grasping, from holding everything lightly, from not identifying with possessions or even the body as mine. The master didn't give away his robe from some moral principle. He gave it because there was no one holding on to it, no sense of loss, only appreciation for the moon's beauty and compassion for those still caught in the illusion that happiness comes from acquiring things. What would your life be like if you could hold everything this lightly? Not with detachment in the sense of not caring, but with the open-handed presence that allows life to flow through you without constantly grasping, controlling, defending, protecting what you think is yours. Perhaps you're afraid that without grasping, you'd lose everything, that you need to hold tight to keep what matters. But observe actual experience. When you grasp at a relationship, demanding it remain exactly as it is, doesn't the grasping itself create distance, tension, suffering? When you hold lightly, allowing the other person to be as they are, allowing the relationship to evolve naturally, isn't there more space for genuine connection, for love to flow freely without the constriction of fear? The practice of meditation sits at the heart of Buddhist training, yet even meditation can become another form of grasping if we're not careful. People approach meditation with ideas about what should happen. Thoughts should stop, peace should arise, enlightenment should occur. Then they sit down, and the thoughts don't stop, peace doesn't arise, and enlightenment definitely doesn't occur. So they conclude they're doing it wrong, they're bad at meditation, they're not spiritual enough. More suffering, more striving, more becoming, all wrapped in spiritual packaging, but fundamentally no different from the striving we do in the rest of our lives. True meditation is not about achieving any particular state. It's about being present with whatever state is already occurring. Thoughts? Fine. Let them come and go like clouds in the sky. Restlessness? Okay. Feel it. Notice it. Allow it to be as it is without trying to fix it or push it away. Sleepiness? That too. The practice is not in creating some ideal experience, but in changing your relationship with all experience, learning to be the space in which thoughts, feelings and sensations arise and pass without identification, without the constant grasping and aversion that creates suffering. When you sit down to meditate, you sit down as nobody special, doing nothing special, going nowhere. You are not trying to become enlightened. You are not trying to feel peaceful. You are not even trying to be present. You are already present. Always present, always here. The practice is simply recognizing this, returning to this, again and again, each time the mind wanders into past or future, into stories and judgments and plans. Just returning, not as failure, not as frustration, but as the practice itself, noticing you've wandered and gently coming back, like training a puppy, with patience and kindness, without punishment or harsh self-judgment. This gentleness is crucial. Western culture has trained us to be harsh with ourselves, to use force and willpower to overcome our limitations, to see difficulty as something to conquer. We bring this same energy to spiritual practice and wonder why it creates tension rather than freedom. Buddhist meditation offers a different way, not forcing, not conquering, but allowing, accepting, being with what is. This doesn't mean passivity or giving up. It means a different kind of strength, the strength that comes from non-resistance, like water that flows around obstacles rather than trying to smash through them, yet over time wears away even solid rock. Picture a jar of muddy water. If you shake it, trying to clear the water through force, it only gets muddier. But if you set it down and leave it alone, the mud gradually settles by itself, and the water becomes clear. Your mind is like that jar. You don't make it clear through effort and force. You allow it to clear by not disturbing it, by not constantly stirring up thoughts and emotions through grasping and aversion. This is the meaning of non-doing in Buddhist practice. Not doing nothing, but not interfering with the natural settling. The natural clarity that reveals itself when the agitation stops. In the Zen tradition, they sometimes speak of just sitting, shikantaza in Japanese. Not sitting to achieve anything, not sitting as a means to some other end, but sitting as complete in itself, as the full expression of awakened presence right now, not waiting for anything else, not needing to become anything else. Your busy mind says, but what's the point? If I'm not getting anywhere, why bother? This is the voice of the achieving self, the becoming self, the self that can only value activities in terms of their results. But just sitting is not for that self. It's the recognition that the achieving, becoming self is the problem, not the solution, and that freedom lies not in satisfying its demands, but in seeing through it entirely. When you sit, eventually, maybe after many sessions, maybe after years, something begins to shift. Not because you've achieved anything, but because you've stopped trying to achieve. And in that stopping, reality is allowed to reveal itself as it is. You begin to notice the space between thoughts, the silence underneath all sound, the stillness that holds all movement. You begin to recognize that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. You are not your feelings. You are the vast space in which feelings arise and pass. This recognition is not conceptual understanding. It's direct seeing, unmistakable, immediate, like suddenly noticing the screen on which a movie plays after being absorbed in the movie for so long that you forgot the screen existed. And here's the beautiful paradox. This recognition doesn't require meditation. You can recognize it right now, this awareness that is reading these words, hearing these sounds, being the space in which all experience occurs. Meditation is just a practice that makes this recognition more likely, that creates conditions conducive to seeing what has always been here. But the truth itself is available always, in every moment, regardless of whether you meditate or not, regardless of whether you're sitting peacefully in a temple or stuck in traffic or washing dishes or anything else. The recognition that liberates is not dependent on circumstances. It's dependent on seeing, and seeing can happen anytime, any place. This is why Buddhism ultimately points beyond all practices, beyond all techniques, even beyond Buddhism itself. The practices are useful, they serve a purpose, like the raft that carries you across the river. But don't mistake the raft for the destination. Don't become so attached to the practices that they become another form of identity, another thing to grasp. I am a meditator. I am spiritual. I am Buddhist. These are just more thoughts, more identities, more ways of constructing a separate self. The liberation that Buddhism points toward is freedom from all identity, even spiritual identity. There is a famous koan in Zen. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. This sounds shocking, violent, completely contrary to Buddhist values of non-harming and reverence for awakened beings. But like all koans, it's not meant to be understood literally. It's meant to shock the mind out of its habitual patterns, to cut through our tendency to make objects of veneration, including the Buddha himself. The teaching is this: if you think you found the Buddha outside yourself, as an external figure to worship or emulate, you've missed the point entirely. The Buddha nature is your own nature. Looking for it outside yourself is like searching everywhere for the eyeglasses that are already on your face. This is revolutionary. Most religions tell you that salvation comes from outside, from God's grace, from accepting the right beliefs, from the intercession of saints, from performing correct rituals. Buddhism says the opposite. No one can save you. No external force can grant you liberation. The Buddha cannot give you enlightenment. The best teacher in the world cannot give it to you. Why? Because enlightenment is not something you lack. It's not something you need to acquire. It's the recognition of what you already are, what you have always been, prior to all the conditioning, all the concepts, all the stories about who you think you are. This means the spiritual path, paradoxically, is not about becoming better, more evolved, more enlightened. It's about stripping away what is false to reveal what is true, like a sculptor removing marble to reveal the statue that was always there, hidden in the stone. You are already whole. You are already complete. You are already the Buddha nature, the awakened awareness, the presence that holds all experience. But this truth is covered over by layers of conditioning, by beliefs about what you are and what you are not, by the hypnotic trance of being a separate self in a world of other separate selves. The spiritual practices, meditation, study, ethical conduct, devotion, these are not building something new. They are removing obstacles, softening the grip of identification, creating space for recognition to occur. It's like cleaning a mirror. The mirror's reflective capacity doesn't change. It was always there. But when dust covers the surface, the reflection is obscured. You clean the mirror not to create reflectivity, but to reveal the reflectivity that was always present. Your practices are like that cleaning, not adding anything, just removing what obscures. What obscures the recognition of your true nature? Primarily, it's the constant activity of thinking, the non-stop mental commentary that interprets, judges, plans, remembers, worries, and fantasizes. This thinking creates the illusion of being a separate self living inside your head, looking out at a world of objects, including other separate selves. But this is just a model, a way of organizing experience, not an accurate description of what is actually happening. What is actually happening is much more simple and immediate. There is seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, thinking. Experience is arising in awareness, as awareness, unfolding moment by moment without any separate experiencer at the center of it. Try this. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. What do you hear? Perhaps sounds of traffic, the hum of appliances, the rustle of wind, the beating of your own heart. Notice that there's just hearing. There's no one in your head hearing. There's just the act of hearing itself, sounds arising in awareness. Now, notice thoughts arising. Thoughts about the sounds, thoughts about this exercise, thoughts about your day. Notice that these thoughts also just arise. You don't create them. You don't control them. They appear in awareness just like sounds do. So where is the separate self? Where is the you that's supposedly in control, making choices, living your life? Can you find it? Or do you only find the thought of a self, another appearance in awareness, another object arising and passing? This investigation, done sincerely, begins to loosen the knot of identification. You start to notice that what you've been calling me is just a collection of thoughts, sensations, memories, and habits, all arising in the space of awareness, none of them permanent, none of them solid, none of them constituting an actual entity. This doesn't mean you disappear. Experience continues. There is still a body, still thoughts, still preferences and characteristics. But the center of gravity shifts from identification with the content of experience to resting as the awareness that holds all content, from person to presence, from someone to no one, from thing to no thing. This recognition of no self, anatta in Pali, is one of the most challenging and most liberating of Buddhist insights. It seems to contradict everything we've been taught, everything our culture assumes, everything our experience seems to tell us. Of course, there's a self. I'm right here, thinking these thoughts, making these decisions, living this life. But look more carefully. What you call self is really just a process, a flow, a series of moments of experience arising and passing so rapidly they create the illusion of continuity, like individual frames in a film creating the illusion of continuous motion. There is no actual self to be found, only the finding, only the looking, only the awareness in which the sense of self appears and disappears moment by moment. When this recognition begins to stabilize, something extraordinary happens. The problems that seemed so overwhelming begin to lose their weight. Not because circumstances change, circumstances remain exactly as they are, but because there's no longer someone at the center frantically trying to control everything, make everything okay, ensure that life unfolds according to preference. There's just life, living itself, unfolding according to its own nature, and you recognize yourself as the whole process. Not as a separate victim of circumstances, but as the field of awareness in which all circumstances appear. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop caring about outcomes. You still make choices, still act, still have preferences. But the quality of action changes. Instead of action driven by fear, by the separate self's constant anxiety about its survival and status, There is action arising from presence, from responsiveness to what the moment calls for. This is what Buddhism calls skillful action, not action driven by the ego's agenda, but action that serves the whole, that responds appropriately to what is needed, that comes from wisdom rather than reaction. Think of how much energy you expend in self-concern, worrying about what others think of you, defending your image, trying to prove your worth, protecting yourself from criticism and rejection. This energy is tremendous, exhausting, consuming. It's like carrying a heavy backpack everywhere you go, never allowed to set it down, never able to rest. But when the sense of being a separate self begins to lighten, when you stop believing so completely in the story of me, this energy is freed up. You can respond to situations directly, without the filter of self-concern. You can act with greater spontaneity, greater presence, greater effectiveness, because you're not constantly protecting and promoting a self-image. The Buddha spoke of 3 poisons that create suffering: greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed is the mind of grasping, of wanting experience to be different than it is, of constantly reaching for pleasure and satisfaction. Hatred is the mind of aversion, of pushing away what's unpleasant, of resisting reality as it presents itself. Delusion is the fundamental ignorance of our true nature, the belief in being a separate self, which gives rise to both greed and hatred. When delusion is seen through, when the separate self is recognized as fiction, greed and hatred lose their power. There's still preferences. The body naturally moves toward pleasure and away from pain, but there's no longer the desperate quality of grasping and aversion, no longer the sense that your well-being depends on getting what you want and avoiding what you don't want. This is the peace that Buddhism offers, not the peace of pleasant circumstances, not the peace that comes from getting your way, but the peace of no longer being at war with reality. When you stop resisting what is, when you stop demanding that life conform to your preferences, when you recognize that the separate self who has all these demands is itself a fiction, then there's a deep relaxation, a profound okayness that doesn't depend on anything. This is the peace that passes understanding, not because it's mystical or mysterious, but because it exists prior to the understanding mind, prior to all concepts and interpretations, in the simple presence that you are beneath all the stories. Listen carefully now, because this is important. You don't need to become anyone special to realize this peace. You don't need to be more spiritual, more disciplined, more pure, more worthy. These ideas of needing to become something are themselves obstacles, more stories from the separate self trying to ensure its survival by becoming a spiritual self, an enlightened self, a worthy self. But liberation is not for the self, it's from the self. It's the recognition that you are not and have never been the limited, separate entity you believed yourself to be. You are the infinite awareness in which that entity appears as one small, passing wave in a vast ocean. Right now, as you rest here, this recognition is available, not as something to achieve in the future through years of practice, but as a simple noticing of what is already the case. You are aware. This is undeniable. You cannot doubt awareness itself, because the doubting would happen in awareness. So awareness is the one certain thing, not the content of awareness, which constantly changes, but awareness itself, the knowing presence that has been with you every moment of your life, from your first breath to this moment now. Unchanging, unchanged, untouched by any experience that passes through it. Are you that awareness? Or are you the temporary phenomena appearing in awareness, the thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions that come and go? Common sense says you're the person, the body-mind, the one having experiences. But what does direct investigation reveal? Can you find this person as an actual entity, or do you only find the concept of a person, the thought, I, the feeling of being a separate center, all of which are themselves just more appearances in awareness? If you can observe the sense of being a self, If you can notice the feeling of I, then you cannot be that. You must be what observes it. And that which observes is not itself observable. It's not an object. It's the subject, the presence, the awareness itself. This awareness, call it consciousness, presence, being, the true self, Buddha nature, the witness, whatever word points you toward the recognition, this is what you are. Not as another identity to grasp, not as a new and improved self-concept, but as the absence of all identities, the space in which all identities appear and dissolve. It's not a thing you can possess. It's not a state you can achieve. It's what you are when all doing ceases, when all becoming stops, when there's just simple presence, here and now, with no need for anything to be different than it is. In Christianity, there's a phrase, "Be still and know that I am God." In Buddhism, it might be, "Be still and know that you are awareness." The stillness is not physical stillness. You can be physically active and still be rooted in this stillness. It's the stillness of mind, the quietness that exists when thinking slows down, when the constant commentary pauses, when there's just presence without the filter of concepts. In that stillness, recognition becomes possible, not through effort, not through striving, but through releasing effort, through surrendering the search, through allowing yourself to be as you are without trying to become anything else. The great Zen master Dogen wrote, "To study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things." Notice the progression here. First, you turn attention inward to investigate what you are. This is meditation, self-inquiry, the practice of presence. Then, through this investigation, you forget the self, not through suppression or denial, but through seeing that what you took to be the self is not actually there as a solid entity. And in that forgetting, in that release of identification, you are enlightened by all things, meaning you recognize yourself as the awareness in which all things appear, not separate from anything, intimately connected to everything. This is a radically different relationship to life than the one most of us have been taught. We've been taught that we are isolated individuals who must make our way in a sometimes hostile world, competing for resources, defending ourselves against threats, trying to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. This worldview creates enormous stress, loneliness, and suffering. Buddhism offers an alternative vision. You are not separate from the world. You are the world, temporarily experiencing itself from this particular perspective, intimately connected to everything else in a vast web of interdependence that extends across space and time. When you see this, really see it, compassion and love arise naturally. Not as moral obligations, but as spontaneous expressions of your true nature. How could you harm another when you recognize they are not other? How could you remain indifferent to suffering when you see that the suffering of others is not fundamentally different from your own? The boundaries we draw between self and other, us and them, are revealed as conceptual overlays, useful for navigating practical reality, but not ultimately true. At the deepest level, there is only consciousness, appearing as infinite forms, each form a unique expression of the one reality. Does this mean individual differences don't matter? No, your unique perspective matters. Your gifts and talents matter. The particular form that consciousness takes as you matters, but it matters the way a particular wave matters, not as separate from the ocean, but as a beautiful expression of the ocean's nature, valid and valuable while it lasts, but not permanent, not separate, part of a larger whole that's constantly moving, changing, expressing itself in ever new forms. Embracing this vision doesn't require faith. You can test it in your own experience. Pay attention to your actual experience right now. Where does inside end and outside begin? You might say at your skin, but is that actually true? The air you breathe becomes part of your body, then returns to the world. Sounds arise out there, but are experienced in here. Yet where exactly is the boundary? The more carefully you look, the more you see that these boundaries are conceptual, not experiential. In direct experience, there's just experiencing, a seamless flow of sensory data arising in awareness, with no clear division between experiencer and experienced. This seamless flow is your actual reality, prior to the mind's habit of dividing everything into subject and object, self and other, inside and outside. The divisions are useful. You need to know where your body ends so you don't walk into walls, but they're not ultimately real. They're conventions, practical necessities, but not accurate descriptions of what's actually happening. What's actually happening is far more mysterious, more intimate, more interconnected than our conceptual models suggest. In Zen, they speak of intimacy as the hallmark of awakening. Not intimacy in the romantic sense, but intimacy as the recognition that nothing is separate from you, that every moment is an encounter with your own being, that the entire universe is your body, your expression, your face. The bird singing outside your window is not separate from you. The stranger passing on the street is not separate from you. The stars burning millions of light years away are not separate from you. All are consciousness, being, awareness, the one reality expressing itself in infinite forms. This perspective doesn't cancel out the practical reality of being a person with responsibilities, relationships, and challenges. You still have to pay your bills, maintain your health, treat people with respect and kindness. The recognition of non-duality doesn't mean you abandon the relative world of multiplicity. It means you see the relative and absolute as two perspectives on the same reality, both true in their own context, not contradicting each other, but revealing different dimensions of a truth too vast to be captured by any single perspective. This is the middle way again, not choosing between two extremes, but recognizing that both are valid in their appropriate context. At the relative level, you are indeed a separate person with your own history, personality, and path. At the absolute level, there is no separate person, only awareness appearing as all people, all things, all experiences. Both are true. The suffering comes from taking either perspective as exclusively true, from living entirely at the relative level, or trying to bypass the relative in favor of the absolute. Some spiritual seekers make the mistake of using non-dual philosophy to avoid dealing with psychological issues, relational problems, or practical challenges. There's no self, so nothing really matters. It's all just an illusion. This is spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid the work of being human. Yes, from the absolute perspective, there is no separate self. But from the relative perspective, healing trauma matters, treating people well matters, taking care of your body and mind matters. Buddhism isn't about escaping the human realm, but about being fully human, awake to both dimensions, the wave and the ocean, the individual and the whole. The Buddha's first noble truth states that there is suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, inherent in conditioned existence. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. Bodies age and break down. Relationships end through death or separation. Circumstances change in ways we don't prefer. Pleasant experiences don't last. This is the nature of conditioned reality. Impermanent, unreliable, unable to provide lasting satisfaction. To expect permanent happiness from impermanent phenomena is to guarantee disappointment. But the Buddha didn't stop with this diagnosis. The second noble truth identifies the cause of suffering, craving or attachment, the mind that clings to pleasure and pushes away pain, that demands reality, conform to its preferences. The third noble truth proclaims that this suffering can end, that liberation is possible, that you don't have to remain trapped in the cycle of craving and aversion. And the fourth noble truth lays out the path, the eightfold path of ethical conduct, meditation, and wisdom. This path is not a ladder you climb to get somewhere else. It's more like a description of how an awakened person naturally lives, with right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These aren't rules imposed from outside, but natural expressions of wisdom and compassion. When you see clearly how things are, these ways of being arise spontaneously, like flowers growing from properly prepared soil. Right understanding means seeing the nature of reality, impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Right intention means orienting your heart toward wisdom, kindness, and letting go rather than toward greed, hatred, and clinging. Right speech means speaking truthfully, kindly, usefully, avoiding lies, harsh words, gossip, and idle chatter. Right action means acting ethically, not harming others, not taking what's not given, not engaging in sexual misconduct. Right livelihood means earning your living in ways that don't cause harm, that contribute to the well-being of others and the world. These first 5 aspects of the path relate to ethical conduct, not as obedience to external rules, but as the natural expression of wisdom. When you recognize that harming others is harming yourself, that there's no real separation, that everything is interconnected, then ethical behavior flows naturally, not from should or ought, but from understanding. You don't refrain from harming others because you'll be punished if you do. You refrain from harming because you see that harm creates suffering, and you no longer want to create suffering for yourself or anyone else. Right effort means making wise effort, not forcing or striving, but gently cultivating helpful qualities like mindfulness, concentration, kindness, and wisdom, while letting unhelpful qualities like hatred, greed, and delusion gradually fall away through non-feeding. It's like tending a garden. You water what you want to grow and remove weeds, not through violence, but through patient, consistent care. Right mindfulness means being present with your experience, aware of body sensations, feelings, mind states, and phenomena as they arise and pass, without getting lost in them, without identifying with them, maintaining the perspective of awareness, observing the flow of experience. Right concentration means developing the ability to rest attention steadily on an object, the breath, a phrase, a visual object, training the mind to become stable, focused, and collected rather than scattered and distracted. Together, these 8 aspects form a complete path of transformation. Not transformation of who you are into someone else, but transformation of your relationship with who you are. From identification with the content of experience to resting as the awareness that holds all content. From being lost in the story of a separate self to recognizing your true nature as presence itself. But don't make even this path into another burden, another list of things you should do, another standard you're failing to meet. The spirit of Buddhism is lightness, not heaviness. It's about releasing burdens, not adding them. If the teachings become another source of pressure and stress, you've misunderstood them. They're meant to point you toward freedom, not create a new and improved prison with prettier decorations. There's a beautiful story about a Zen master and his student walking through the forest. They came to a wide stream, and there on the bank stood a beautiful woman in fine clothes, unable to cross without ruining her garments. The master, despite the monastic rule against touching women, simply picked her up, carried her across the stream, set her down on the other side, and continued walking. The student walked beside him in shocked silence, his mind churning with judgment and confusion. How could his master break the rules so flagrantly? Hours later, unable to contain himself any longer, the student finally asked, "Master, how could you carry that woman? You know our rules forbid such contact." The master looked at him with gentle eyes and replied, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This story illustrates how we cling to thoughts, judgments, and rules long after they're relevant, creating suffering through our inability to let go. The master did what the situation called for, then moved on, completely present with the next moment. The student remained trapped in his head, carrying the past into the present, burdened by concepts of right and wrong that prevented him from simply being present with what is. Buddhism is full of stories about masters breaking rules, acting in unexpected ways, doing things that seem to contradict the teachings. These stories exist to prevent us from turning Buddhism into another rigid system, another set of rules to follow slavishly without understanding. The point is not the rule, but the wisdom behind the rule. The point is not the form, but the essence. When you understand the essence, you can be flexible with form. When you only follow form without understanding essence, you become rigid, judgmental, caught in the letter of the law while missing its spirit. Jesus made a similar point when he said, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." Religious rules and practices exist to serve human flourishing, not the other way around. When they stop serving that purpose, when they become ends in themselves, they've lost their reason for being. This is why Buddhism adapts so readily to different cultures, because it understands that forms are provisional, that what matters is the liberation that the forms are meant to serve, and that different forms might serve different people in different contexts. So don't worry about being a good Buddhist. Don't concern yourself with whether you're doing it right. These are just more thoughts from the separate self trying to establish itself as worthy, as spiritual, as better than others. The whole point is to see through that self, not to build it up with spiritual accomplishments. You don't need to be worthy. You already are worthy. Not because of anything you've done or achieved, but because worthiness is your nature, the nature of awareness itself, which is prior to all actions, all achievements, all judgments about better and worse. Can you feel how liberating this is? You don't need to become anyone else. You don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to improve or evolve or reach some higher level. These are all games the ego plays to maintain itself, to ensure its survival by becoming a spiritual ego, an enlightened ego, but still an ego, still the illusion of separation. True liberation is simpler, more immediate, more ordinary than any of that. It's here right now, in the simple recognition that you are aware, that awareness is not separate from anything, that you are the presence in which all experience unfolds, and that this presence is not something you achieve, but something you are and have always been. Rest in that recognition. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't turn it into another spiritual attainment to grasp and protect. Just let it be obvious, simple, ordinary. You are aware. Full stop. That's it. That's the great secret. That's what all the teachings point toward. Not something exotic or mystical, but something so simple and immediate that we overlook it constantly, searching for something more impressive, more special, more elsewhere. The Buddha's final words, according to tradition, were, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This might seem contradictory. How can you strive if everything is impermanent and you're already complete? But the striving he pointed to is not the striving of becoming. It's the diligence of remaining awake, of not falling back into the hypnotic trance of being a separate self, of continuing to see clearly even as the mind tries to cloud vision with its constant commentary and interpretation. This is the great work, not achieving enlightenment, which is impossible because there's no one to achieve it and nothing to achieve, but remaining awake, remaining present, returning again and again to simple presence whenever you notice you've been lost in thought, in story, in the trance of separation. This returning is the practice, not achieving some special state, but recognizing what's always here when you stop long enough to notice. In this moment, right now, the past is gone. It exists only as memory, as thought arising in present awareness. The future hasn't happened yet. It exists only as imagination, as projection, as thought arising in present awareness. All that actually exists is this moment, this now, this immediate experience unfolding in awareness. Yet we spend most of our lives either ruminating about the past or worrying about the future, rarely fully present with the only moment that actually exists, this one. What would it be like to live fully in the present moment, not as an achievement or a practice, but as a simple recognition of what's actually true? Not to never think about past or future, that would be impractical, but to recognize that even when you think about past or future, the thinking is happening now, in present awareness. You never actually leave the present moment. It's impossible to leave it. Where would you go? The present is not a small slice of time sandwiched between past and future. The present is all there is. Past and future are concepts that arise in the present, not actual separate realities. When you deeply understand this, the burden of time begins to lift. So much of our suffering is related to time. Regret about the past. Anxiety about the future. Feeling that we're running out of time, that we've wasted time, that we're behind where we should be. But these are all stories, narratives constructed in the mind, having nothing to do with the reality of this moment. In this moment right now, is there actually a problem? Not the thought of a problem, not the story of a problem, but an actual problem, here and now. Usually, if you're honest, you'll find that right now in this present moment there's no problem. Problems exist in the narrative time, in the story of past and future, but in the actual present, there's just what is. Breathing, hearing, feeling, thinking. No crisis, no emergency, just this moment's experiencing. Of course, practical concerns exist. You need to plan for the future, learn from the past. But you don't need to be psychologically burdened by past or future. You can engage with them practically while remaining rooted in the present, in the only moment that ever actually exists. This is the freedom that presence offers, not freedom from circumstances, which continue as they will, but freedom from the psychological suffering created by resisting the present moment, by wishing it were different, by living in mental time rather than actual now. The now is not a problem. The now is just what is. The sense of problem arises when the mind compares what is with what it thinks should be, when it judges present reality as inadequate, wrong, not enough. But what if this moment is exactly as it should be? Not in some cosmic, predetermined sense, but simply in the sense that it is as it is, and it couldn't be otherwise in this moment. Because if it could be otherwise, it would be otherwise. This moment is the result of all causes and conditions that have led to it. Fighting against it is fighting against the entire universe, against the whole flow of cause and effect that has created this present moment. This doesn't mean you don't work to change things. It means you accept what is while working to change what can be changed, without the suffering that comes from arguing with reality. There's a saying, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is physical and emotional discomfort, which is part of life. Suffering is the story we add to the pain, the resistance, the "this shouldn't be happening," the catastrophizing, the comparing. When pain arises, and it will, because you have a body and emotions, and these respond to circumstances, you have a choice. You can be present with the pain, feeling it without resistance, allowing it to be as it is, and you'll find that pure pain without the story is much more tolerable than you expected. Or you can resist it, fight it, add layers of mental suffering to the physical or emotional pain, and create an experience that's much worse than the original pain warranted. This is practical wisdom, not philosophical theory. You can test it right now. Is there any discomfort in your body? Perhaps your neck is tight, or your back aches, or your stomach is unsettled. Bring your attention to that sensation. Instead of trying to fix it or distract from it, just feel it. Notice its qualities: burning, aching, tingling, pressure. Notice how it changes from moment to moment. Notice the space around it. Then notice if there's a story. This shouldn't be here. What if it gets worse? What's wrong with me? Recognize that story as thought, not truth. Come back to the pure sensation without the story. What happens? Usually you'll find that the pure sensation is much more tolerable, and sometimes it even shifts or dissolves when you stop resisting it. This is the wisdom of acceptance, not passive resignation, but active allowing, meeting reality as it is rather than as you wish it to be. From that place of acceptance, skillful action becomes possible. When you're not caught in resistance, when you're present with what is, you can see clearly what needs to be done, if anything. Sometimes the appropriate action is to change circumstances. Sometimes it's to accept them. Sometimes it's to shift your perspective. Wisdom knows the difference, and wisdom only becomes available when you stop fighting long enough to see clearly. The Buddha often spoke of the middle way, and we've touched on this before, but it deserves deeper exploration because it's so central to Buddhist practice and so easily misunderstood. The middle way is not about being moderate, lukewarm, or uncommitted. It's about finding the balance point where you're neither grasping nor rejecting, neither forcing nor collapsing, neither indulging nor denying. It's the place of equilibrium, of equanimity, of being with what is without leaning away from or into it. Think of a guitar string, too loose and it makes no sound, no music, too tight and it breaks, but at just the right tension, it sings. This is the middle way in practice, not too tight, not too loose, but just right, allowing the music of presence to sound through you. In meditation, this means not forcing concentration but not letting the mind wander completely either. In life, it means engaging fully without attaching to outcomes, caring deeply without grasping, being passionate without being possessed by passion. This balance is dynamic, not static. It's not a position you achieve once and maintain. It's a constant adjustment, a moment-by-moment recalibration, like riding a bicycle. You're always making tiny corrections to maintain balance, never perfectly still, but moving through a series of small adjustments that create the experience of stable forward motion. Life is like this too. You're never perfectly balanced in some fixed way. You're always adjusting, responding, adapting, and that's not a problem. That's the practice. Western culture tends toward extremes. We work too hard, then burn out. We diet strictly, then binge. We're stoic and controlled, then emotionally volatile. We swing between extremes rather than finding the sustainable middle path. Buddhism offers an alternative. What if you didn't have to be extreme to be committed? What if you could care deeply without being overwhelmed? What if you could be disciplined without being rigid, relaxed without being lazy, compassionate without being depleted? This sustainable approach is especially relevant for spiritual practice. Many people approach spirituality with intense enthusiasm, meditating for hours, reading every book, attending every retreat, convinced that more is better, that if a little practice is good, a lot must be better. Then they burn out, become disillusioned, and abandon the path entirely. The middle way suggests a different approach, consistent, sustainable practice that you can maintain not just for weeks or months, but for years, for a lifetime. Better to meditate 10 minutes every day than to do a 3-hour marathon once and never return to the cushion. The same principle applies to ethical practice. Some people try to be perfectly virtuous, never speaking a harsh word, never having a selfish thought, holding themselves to impossible standards. Then they fail, as everyone does, and they either become hypocrites, pretending to be what they're not, or they give up entirely, concluding that ethical behavior is impossible. The middle way says, do your best. Be sincere in your intention to live ethically. When you fail, and you will, acknowledge it, learn from it, and begin again. Don't expect perfection from yourself. You're human, conditioned, imperfect by nature. Progress, not perfection. Direction, not destination. This gentleness with yourself is not self-indulgence. It's wisdom. Harsh self-judgment doesn't lead to transformation. It leads to more suffering, more defensiveness, more rigidity. Genuine transformation happens through self-compassion, through recognizing your humanity, through treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a dear friend. When you make a mistake, would you berate a friend, tell them they're worthless, that they'll never change? Of course not. You'd be understanding, encouraging, supportive. Why treat yourself worse than you would treat others? The Dalai Lama has spoken about this, noting that many Western students struggle with self-hatred in a way that Tibetans find hard to understand. In Tibetan culture, people generally have a positive relationship with themselves, seeing their basic nature as good, as Buddha nature temporarily obscured by confusion and conditioning. But Western culture, with its emphasis on original sin, perfectionism, and harsh achievement orientation, creates tremendous self-hatred in many people. They come to Buddhism already at war with themselves, and they turn Buddhism into another weapon in that war, another way to judge themselves as inadequate. Buddhism is not meant to be another source of self-judgment. It's meant to be a path of liberation, of self-understanding, of coming home to your true nature. If your practice is creating more suffering rather than less, something has gone wrong. You've misunderstood something, probably by taking teachings that point to ultimate truth and turning them into moral judgments about your relative human reality. Yes, there is no self, but that doesn't mean the person should be judged as wrong or bad. Yes, attachment creates suffering, but that doesn't mean you're a failure for having attachments. These teachings describe reality. They're not commandments or judgments. When the Buddha described the nature of suffering, he wasn't condemning human beings for being attached. He was diagnosing the mechanism by which suffering is created, with the same neutral, compassionate clarity that a doctor brings to diagnosing an illness. The doctor doesn't judge you for being sick. The doctor helps you understand what's happening and what you can do about it. The Buddha is like that, a physician for the soul, offering diagnosis and treatment for the suffering inherent in conditioned existence, without judgment, without blame, with only compassion and the wish to help you be free. So receive these teachings with that spirit, not as judgments of your inadequacy, but as maps that can help you navigate the territory of human existence with greater wisdom and less suffering. You're not bad for having desire, for feeling fear, for getting angry, for being confused. These are natural responses arising from conditions. The question is not whether they arise, they will, but how you relate to them when they do. Do you identify with them, believing you are your anger, your fear, your desire? Or do you recognize them as temporary weather patterns passing through the sky of awareness that you are? This shift in relationship, this change in identification, is the essence of the spiritual path. Not getting rid of difficult emotions, that's suppression, which doesn't work and creates more problems, but changing your relationship with them, from being them to witnessing them, from drowning in them to watching them arise and pass like waves in the ocean. You are not the wave, you are the ocean. The waves come and go, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but the ocean remains, vast and deep, unchanged by the surface activity. When anger arises, for example, can you feel it as sensations in the body, heat, tension, racing heart, without immediately believing the story that comes with it, without immediately acting on the impulse? Just pause, breathe, notice. This is anger, arising in awareness, like a storm cloud arising in the sky. The sky is not threatened by the cloud. The sky holds the cloud without being affected by it. You can be like that sky, spacious enough to hold any emotion without being overwhelmed by it, without needing to get rid of it or act on it. This doesn't mean you become emotionless or detached in an unhealthy way. You still feel deeply. In fact, you might feel more deeply because you're not defending against feeling, not trying to control or suppress what arises. But there's a quality of spaciousness, of not being controlled by the emotion, of being able to feel it fully without it dictating your actions. This is emotional maturity, emotional freedom. Not freedom from emotions, but freedom within emotions. Freedom to feel without being tyrannized by feelings. The same applies to thoughts. Most people are tyrannized by their thoughts. Believing every thought that arises, following wherever thoughts lead, completely identified with the thinking mind. But thoughts are just mental phenomena, arising and passing in awareness, like everything else. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to do what they suggest. You can notice, worrying thought. Planning thought. Judging thought. And let them pass without engagement, like clouds crossing the sky. Interesting perhaps, but not requiring action, not needing to be believed. This creates an incredible lightness in life. So much of the heaviness we carry is just thoughts. Thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, thoughts about ourselves, thoughts about others, thoughts about how things should be. When you stop giving so much weight to thoughts, when you recognize them as just mental activity arising and passing, life becomes much simpler, much more immediate, much more manageable. You're dealing with what actually is rather than with all the stories about what is. Try this. For the next minute, notice every thought that arises. Don't try to control thoughts or stop them. Just notice them. You might mentally label them: planning, remembering, judging, worrying. Notice how thoughts just appear. You don't create them. They arise on their own, like bubbles rising in water. Notice how they disappear just as spontaneously if you don't grab onto them and elaborate them into full stories. Notice the space between thoughts, the silence that's always there, underlying the mental noise. What you're noticing is awareness itself, the space in which thoughts appear. That awareness is always present, always unchanged, always available. It doesn't come and go with thoughts. It's the constant factor, the ground of all experience. When you rest as that awareness rather than identifying with the content that appears in it, everything changes. Problems don't disappear. Life continues with its challenges. But your relationship with problems shifts fundamentally. Instead of being overwhelmed, you have space to respond wisely. Instead of being reactive, you have freedom to choose. This is what Buddhism calls liberation or enlightenment. Not a mystical experience, not special powers, not seeing visions or having revelations, but this simple shift in identification from content to awareness, from wave to ocean, from person to presence. It sounds simple, and in one sense it is. It's just recognizing what's already true, but in another sense, it's profound, because this recognition undermines everything you thought you were, everything you thought life was about, everything culture has conditioned you to believe. The religion of no religion strips away these cultural conditionings, these layers of belief and assumption, to reveal what's underneath. Not nothing, but no thing. Awareness itself, presence itself, being itself. Call it what you will. It's what remains when everything else is released, when all the seeking stops, when you finally allow yourself to just be as you are, without trying to become anything else, without needing to achieve or prove or defend anything. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to become enlightened, enlightenment is revealed as your nature. When you stop seeking peace, peace is discovered as what you already are. When you stop trying to be present, you recognize that you've never been absent, that presence is not something you achieve but something you are. The whole spiritual search is revealed as unnecessary, not because enlightenment isn't real or doesn't matter, but because you already are what you've been seeking. Does this make the path pointless? No. The path is what brings you to this recognition. It's what clears away the obstacles, quiets the mind enough to see what's always been here, creates space for recognition to occur. But the path doesn't create what it reveals. It reveals what has always been. Like cleaning a mirror reveals reflectivity that was always there, or like opening curtains reveals sunlight that was always shining. The path reveals your true nature, which has never been absent, never been damaged, never been less than whole and complete. You are already the Buddha nature. You are already awareness. You are already free. These are not affirmations to repeat in hopes they'll become true. These are recognitions of what is already true, what has always been true, what could never not be true. You couldn't not be awareness. Awareness is all there is. Everything appears in awareness, is made of awareness, is known by awareness. There's nothing outside of awareness. So how could you not be awareness? What else could you possibly be? The separate self you believe yourself to be is an appearance in awareness, like a character in a dream. The character seems real while you're dreaming, seems to be separate, to have its own independent existence. But when you wake up, you realize the character was just the dream, was just consciousness taking that form, was never actually separate from you as the dreamer. In the same way, this person you think you are is just a temporary form that awareness is taking, a role being played, a costume being worn. It seems real because you're identified with it, because you haven't yet recognized yourself as the awareness wearing the costume rather than as the costume itself. This recognition, when it comes, is often described as awakening, not because you were literally asleep, but because you've been in a kind of hypnotic trance, believing the dream to be the totality of reality, taking the character to be what you are. Awakening is waking up from that trance, recognizing the dream as dream while it's still occurring, seeing through the illusion without needing the illusion to end. Life continues, the person continues, but you're no longer fooled. You know what you are, not the person, but the awareness in which the person appears. And yet, paradoxically, you are also the person, not as a separate entity, but as a temporary expression of awareness, like a wave is an expression of ocean, not separate from ocean, but also not identical with ocean, both true simultaneously. This is the mystery that cannot be captured in concepts, the paradox that can only be lived, not explained. You are both the individual and the whole, both the wave and the ocean, both the person and the presence. To deny either side is to miss the truth. Some spiritual teachings emphasize only the absolute. You are not the person, you are awareness. The person is illusion. This can lead to spiritual bypassing, to denying the very real human experience, to avoiding the work of being a healthy, functional person. Other teachings emphasize only the relative. You are a person with a unique path, unique gifts, unique karma to work out. This can lead to forgetting the absolute dimension, to remaining trapped in the limited perspective of the separate self. Buddhism, at its best, honors both the absolute truth of non-separation and the relative truth of individual existence, holding them together without collapsing into either extreme. This is sophisticated wisdom, and it takes time to understand, not intellectually, but in your lived experience. Don't worry if it seems confusing or contradictory. The conceptual mind cannot grasp it because it exists beyond the mind's dualistic way of thinking, but your direct experience knows it. Your direct experience has always known it, if you pay attention. In moments of profound peace, what's present? In moments of deep love, what's true? In moments of wonder at natural beauty, what's revealed? The sense of separation dissolves, and you recognize yourself as part of the whole, not separate from what you're experiencing, intimately connected to everything. These glimpses are not special states to chase. They're reminders of what's always true, brief clearings in the clouds that usually obscure direct perception. The work, if we can call it work, is to allow those clouds to dissipate more frequently, to rest more consistently in the recognition of what's true rather than in the trance of separation, not through force, not through striving, but through gentle, patient, consistent practice of presence, of returning to this moment, of recognizing awareness again and again and again. And be patient with yourself. This is a reorientation of a lifetime of conditioning, a lifetime of believing you're a separate self who needs to defend, prove, achieve, become. That conditioning doesn't dissolve overnight. It has momentum, like a river flowing in one direction for many years. It takes time to change course. Be gentle with yourself as you navigate this process. Some days the recognition will be clear. Other days you'll be lost in the trance. Both are okay. Both are part of the process. There's no failure here, no getting it wrong. There's only the ongoing practice of waking up moment by moment from the dream of separation. As you lie here now, perhaps approaching sleep, notice the transition that happens. As you fall asleep, what's the last thing to go? It's not awareness. Awareness remains even in deep sleep, though there's no longer a sense of being a person having experiences. In deep sleep, there's just awareness, without content, like the sky at night, vast, empty, present. Then dreams arise like stars appearing, and awareness is now dreaming, taking the form of dream characters and dream experiences. Then you wake, and awareness is now being you, having your experiences, looking through your eyes, thinking your thoughts. What's the constant factor in all three states? Waking, dreaming, sleeping. Awareness. It's always present, taking different forms, appearing as different experiences, but never actually changing, never actually affected by what appears in it. You are that awareness, not the changing states, not the experiences that come and go, but the unchanging witness, the constant presence, the being that has been here all along, from your first breath to this moment now, and will be here until your last breath and perhaps beyond. Who knows? Buddhist teachings on death and rebirth are varied and complex, and you don't need to believe any of them. What's most relevant is this: if you recognize yourself as awareness rather than as the person, death becomes less frightening. The person will die. That's inevitable. The body breaks down, stops functioning. But awareness? Can awareness die? Can the space in which things appear itself disappear? Where would it go? Into what? This is not proof of immortality or evidence for reincarnation. It's just a question worth contemplating. What is this awareness that seems to be present always, unchanging, unaffected by the appearance and disappearance of all phenomena? You don't need an answer. In fact, the answer would just be another concept, another thought appearing in awareness. Better to rest in the question, to let it open your understanding rather than close it with a neat explanation. The Buddha himself refused to answer questions about what happens after death. Not because he didn't know, but because the question itself arises from the wrong perspective, from the perspective of the separate self, wondering about its continuity. But if there is no separate self, what is there to continue or not continue? Only awareness, only presence, only being itself, which doesn't come or go, doesn't begin or end, simply is. Let yourself rest in that being now, not trying to understand it, not trying to grasp it, just being it, which is what you already are, what you cannot not be. Feel the aliveness in your body, the tingling, the warmth, the sense of presence. This aliveness is not limited to your body. It's not coming from your body. Your body is appearing in this aliveness, this presence, this awareness. The body is like a wave in the ocean of awareness, a temporary form that awareness is taking, substantial and real as form, but never separate from the formless awareness that gives it existence. As you drift towards sleep, you can let go of even these words, these concepts, these pointers. They're just fingers pointing at the moon, and you can rest as the moon itself, not the moon you can see, but the moon you are, the awareness in which moon and pointer and seeing all appear. Let the body soften, let the mind quiet, let everything be exactly as it is, without needing to change, fix, or understand anything. This is meditation, this is prayer, this is coming home to yourself, to what you've always been beneath all the seeking, all the becoming, all the struggle. The religion of no religion requires nothing from you. It doesn't demand belief, doesn't impose practices, doesn't threaten punishment for non-compliance. It simply points to what is already true and invites you to see for yourself. Look and see. Is there a separate self when you really investigate? Or is there just experiencing, arising moment by moment in the field of awareness? When you look at what you call me, what do you actually find? Not the concept of me, but the reality. What is actually here beneath the label? This investigation is the heart of Buddhist practice. Not sitting in any particular posture, not following any particular ritual, but looking honestly at your direct experience and seeing what's true. This can happen in meditation, but it can also happen while washing dishes, walking, talking, working, anytime you pause the constant thinking and come into direct contact with present experience. What's here right now, before the mind names and interprets it? What's aware of this moment? What is this awareness that knows? Don't settle for easy answers. Don't take anyone's word for it, including mine, including the Buddha's. Look for yourself. This is empirical investigation, direct research into the nature of your own being. Science investigates the external world. This is science of the internal world, equally valid, equally important, equally capable of discovery and verification. The laboratory is your own awareness. The experiment is attention itself, and the discovery is what you've always been, but forgot in the process of becoming a person. And even that forgetting was necessary. You needed to become a person, to function in the world, to develop skills and relationships, to live a human life. There's nothing wrong with being a person. It's a beautiful thing. This particular expression of awareness, this unique perspective, this individual manifestation of the whole. The problem is only when you believe the person is all you are, when you forget the awareness that holds the person, when you identify so completely with the wave that you forget your ocean. The spiritual path, in essence, is remembering what you forgot, returning to what you are beneath what you've become, recognizing the ocean while still being the wave. This doesn't negate the wave. The wave remains, with its unique shape and movement and lifespan. But the wave knows itself as ocean, not separate from ocean, not isolated or alone, but part of the vast, interconnected whole. This knowing transforms everything while changing nothing. Life continues exactly as before. Same body, same circumstances, same challenges. But the relationship to life is fundamentally different. There's peace that doesn't depend on conditions, joy that isn't contingent on circumstances, love that flows freely because it's no longer limited by the boundaries of a separate self. This is the promise of Buddhism, if we can call it a promise, not a guarantee, because there's no authority guaranteeing anything, but a possibility tested and verified by countless practitioners over millennia, available to anyone willing to look honestly at their own experience. You don't have to be special. You don't have to be worthy. You don't have to be anything other than what you are. The recognition that liberates is not reserved for saints or monks or specially gifted individuals. It's available to everyone because it's not something you achieve. It's something you recognize, and recognition requires only clear seeing, which comes from honest attention to what is. So rest tonight in this understanding, not as something you have to remember or work on, but as something you can relax into, like relaxing into a warm bath. Let yourself be held by the awareness that you are. Let yourself be supported by the presence that has always been here. Let yourself rest in the being that needs nothing, lacks nothing, is complete just as it is. This is not spiritual materialism, not acquiring something new or becoming someone better. This is spiritual simplicity, just this, just now, just being, nothing added, nothing taken away, complete as is. The Zen master Bankei used to speak of the unborn Buddha mind, the awareness that was never born and will never die, that's present prior to all conditioning, all becoming, all identity formation. He would tell his students, live in the unborn and you'll be free of all difficulties. Not because difficulties won't arise, they will, because you have a body and live in the world, but because you won't be creating additional difficulties through resistance, through taking everything personally, through believing you're the limited, vulnerable, separate self that needs to defend and protect itself at all costs. live in the unborn. What does this mean practically? It means rest as awareness rather than as the person. Awareness is unborn, uncreated, not produced by causes and conditions. The person is born, conditioned, created by genes and environment and culture and countless influences. You are both, the unconditioned awareness and the conditioned person. But your identity, your sense of what you most fundamentally are, can rest in awareness rather than in the person. This doesn't negate the person or make personal development unimportant. It just means you're rooted in something deeper, something that isn't threatened by the challenges and changes the person faces. This is practical wisdom for navigating life's difficulties. When you face loss, disappointment, failure, and you will, because everyone does, you have two choices. You can identify as the person suffering these setbacks, believing you are diminished, damaged, less than you were before. Or you can rest as the awareness that witnesses these experiences, recognizes them as painful but not ultimately threatening to what you most essentially are. The awareness that you are is not diminished by loss, not damaged by failure, not threatened by change. It remains constant, spacious, peaceful, able to hold pain without being destroyed by it. This might sound like detachment, like not caring, but it's not. You can care deeply while remaining rooted in awareness. In fact, you can care more fully because you're not paralyzed by fear, not defending against pain, not trying to control outcomes to protect a fragile self-image. You can love deeply without grasping, engage fully without attachment, feel completely without being overwhelmed. This is mature spirituality, not transcending the human realm, but being fully human while also recognizing the transcendent awareness that holds all human experience. Buddhism speaks of the bodhisattva, one who achieves enlightenment but chooses to remain engaged with the world of suffering to help others. This is not martyrdom or self-sacrifice. It's the natural expression of recognizing non-separation. If you truly see that others are not separate from you, helping them is helping yourself. Not as obligation, but as natural expression of love. The bodhisattva doesn't suffer in the neurotic sense, doesn't create additional suffering through resistance and grasping, but remains sensitive to the suffering of others and works to alleviate it. You don't have to be a bodhisattva. You don't have to save anyone. But as your practice deepens, as your recognition of non-separation becomes more stable, compassionate action tends to arise naturally, not from should or ought, not from guilt or obligation, but from simple recognition that serving others is not fundamentally different from taking care of yourself, because the boundary between self and other is revealed as conceptual rather than ultimately real. This doesn't mean you don't maintain healthy boundaries, or that you give endlessly until you're depleted. It means your actions come from a deeper place, from wisdom and compassion, rather than from fear and obligation. As we move through this night together, approaching the threshold of sleep, let's reflect on what we've explored. Buddhism as the religion of no religion, not a set of beliefs to adopt, but a path of investigation to walk. Not a doctrine to accept, but a reality to recognize. Not something to become, but something to remember, to return to rest in. The paradoxes we've encountered. Form is emptiness. Self is no self. Achieving by non-achieving. These are not logical puzzles to solve, but pointers to a reality that transcends conceptual understanding, that can only be lived, felt, recognized in direct experience. You've been resting here, listening, or perhaps drifting, and in this resting, you've been practicing the essence of the teaching without doing anything special. Just being present, just allowing experience to unfold, just witnessing thoughts and sensations arise and pass without needing to control or change anything. This is it. This is the practice. Not sitting in a perfect posture with incense burning and bells ringing, though those can be lovely, but this simple presence, available always, in any moment, requiring nothing special, just attention, just awareness, just being what you already are. The Buddhism that liberates is not the Buddhism of temples and robes and rituals, though those have their place and value. It's the Buddhism that lives in your direct experience, in the recognition that happens when you stop long enough to notice what's actually true. You are aware. This is undeniable. From that undeniable starting point, everything else can be questioned, investigated, seen through or verified. What is awareness? What is its nature? What are you, really, beneath all the stories? These questions are not intellectual. They're alive, immediate, relevant to every moment. Who is experiencing this moment? Where is this I that seems to be at the center of experience? When you look for it, really look, what do you find? Not the thought I, not the concept of self, but the actual reality. What's here? Most people never look. They assume they know what they are based on what they've been told, what culture has taught them, what feels true based on years of habit. But what if you look for yourself? What if you investigate without assuming you already know the answer? This is the invitation Buddhism extends, not to believe anything, but to look and see. Test the teachings in your own experience. When you grasp at pleasure, does it create satisfaction or craving? When you resist pain, does it decrease the pain or add suffering to pain? When you believe your thoughts without question, does it create clarity or confusion? When you identify as a separate self, does it create security or anxiety? Look and see. Don't take anyone's word for it. Your own experience is the ultimate authority. And what you'll find, if you look honestly, is that the teachings are not beliefs imposed from outside, but descriptions of how things actually work. Grasping does create suffering. Resistance does amplify pain. Believing thoughts without examination does create confusion. Identifying as a separate self does create anxiety. Because the separate self is vulnerable, limited, always under threat. These are not Buddhist teachings. They're observations about reality that the Buddha noticed and shared, that you can verify for yourself if you're willing to look. So Buddhism is not asking you to believe something new. It's asking you to see what's already true, what's always been true, what you've been living but haven't fully recognized. It's like someone pointing out an optical illusion. Once you see both images, the old woman and the young woman in the same drawing, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize the nature of mind, the play of awareness, the dreamlike quality of the separate self, you can't fully forget it, though you may lose sight of it temporarily as conditioning reasserts itself. The work, then, is not achieving recognition once. Many people have momentary recognitions, but allowing that recognition to stabilize, to become your default perspective rather than a rare glimpse. This happens through practice, through repeatedly returning to presence, through constantly questioning identification with thoughts and feelings, through remembering again and again that you are awareness, not content, space, not objects, the witness, not the witnessed. Slowly, gradually, this perspective stabilizes until it becomes more constant, more available, more obvious than the old perspective of being a separate self. But even then, even with stable realization, you remain human, remain vulnerable, remain subject to the conditions of embodied existence. This is important to understand. Enlightenment doesn't make you superhuman. It doesn't exempt you from pain, loss, aging, death. It changes your relationship with these realities, removes the suffering you add to them through resistance and identification, but doesn't eliminate the basic facts of human life. The enlightened person still feels physical pain, still experiences sadness when loved ones die, still faces challenges and difficulties. What changes is the quality of presence with these experiences, the spaciousness that holds them, the wisdom that understands them as part of the natural flow of conditioned existence, rather than as personal afflictions, as evidence of something wrong. Nothing is wrong. This is just how it is to be human, to be embodied, to live in time and space with other beings, all subject to the same basic conditions: birth, aging, sickness, death, change, uncertainty, impermanence. Fighting these conditions creates suffering. Accepting them, working skillfully within them, while recognizing your deeper nature as awareness that transcends them, this is freedom. And so we come to the question of what to do with this understanding, how to live with this recognition, how to navigate daily life while resting in awareness rather than identification with the separate self. The answer is simple, but not easy. You bring presence to whatever you're doing. You meet each moment fresh, without the filter of past conditioning, without the projection of future anxiety, just this moment as it is, responded to appropriately, released completely when it passes. This means you don't withdraw from life, don't abandon relationships and responsibilities, don't retreat into some isolated spiritual purity. You engage fully, but with a different quality, present, responsive, caring but not controlling, loving but not grasping, concerned but not anxious. You live in the world but not of the world, participating fully while knowing it's all a kind of play, a dream, a temporary appearance in the space of awareness, meaningful in its own context but not ultimately defining who you are. This is the balance Buddhism points toward, engaged but unattached, caring but not clinging, passionate but not possessed. You care about outcomes but don't make them the measure of your worth. You work hard but hold results lightly. You love deeply but allow freedom. You have preferences but don't make them ultimatums. You honor your humanity, the feelings, the desires, the vulnerabilities, while also recognizing your divinity, the awareness that transcends all of this, that holds it all without being defined by any of it. In practical terms, this might mean you do your best at work, but don't define yourself by career success or failure. You care for your body, but don't make physical appearance or health the measure of your value. You nurture relationships, but don't make others responsible for your happiness. You have opinions, but hold them lightly, willing to change when new information emerges. You have beliefs, but don't turn them into identity, into something you need to defend against all challenges. This way of being is actually less stressful, less effortful than the constant defending, proving, protecting that the separate self engages in. The separate self must constantly maintain itself, justify itself, protect its image and status. But awareness needs no defense. It simply is, already complete, already whole, already okay regardless of circumstances. When you rest in awareness, you can relax the constant vigilance, the perpetual anxiety, the endless strategizing about how to be safe, worthy, enough. Does this sound too good to be true? Too simple to actually work? Test it yourself. Next time you're in a situation that usually makes you anxious, a difficult conversation, a challenging task, a social situation where you feel judged, try resting as awareness rather than identifying as the anxious person. Notice you are aware of anxiety, aware of worried thoughts, aware of physical tension. You are the awareness, not these temporary experiences. Can you be the space in which anxiety appears rather than being the anxiety itself? Not suppressing it or denying it, but being the space that holds it, the witness that observes it. When you do this, something shifts. The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear, it might remain, but your relationship with it changes. There's space around it, breathing room. You're not drowning in it, not defined by it, not paralyzed by it. You can feel anxious and still act appropriately, speak clearly, be present with others. The anxiety is just weather passing through, and you are the sky that holds all weather without being disturbed by it. This is practical spirituality, applicable to every area of life. With anger, be the awareness that holds anger rather than being the anger. With sadness, be the space in which sadness appears rather than being sadness itself. With desire, recognize it as an energy arising in awareness rather than a command that must be obeyed. With thought, notice thinking rather than being hypnotized by thoughts. With sensation, be the awareness that registers sensation rather than being collapsed into sensation. Each time you make this shift, From identifying with content to resting as awareness, you weaken the habit of identification and strengthen the recognition of your true nature. It becomes easier, more natural, more available. What once required effort eventually becomes effortless, your default mode, rather than something you have to consciously remember. This is the fruit of practice, not achieving some special state, but returning to your natural state, the state you were in before conditioning taught you to believe you were a separate, limited self. And here's the wonderful thing. You don't have to do this perfectly. You don't have to maintain constant awareness, never losing yourself in identification. That would be another form of spiritual perfectionism, another way the ego can hijack the path and turn it into a project of becoming someone special. Instead, it's okay to lose yourself in identification, to get caught in the trance, to forget your true nature. This is normal, human, expected. What matters is that you notice when you've forgotten and gently return, like the meditation instruction to return to the breath. Not with judgment, not with frustration, but with patience and kindness, simply beginning again. As this night draws toward its close, as sleep approaches or perhaps has already begun to take you, rest in this understanding. You are not a problem to be solved. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are not lacking anything essential. You are awareness itself, Buddha nature, presence, being. Complete and whole exactly as you are. The spiritual path is not about becoming this. You already are this. It's about recognizing what has always been true, removing the obstacles to recognition, softening the grip of identification with the separate self. The religion of no religion asks nothing of you except honesty. Honesty in looking at your experience, honesty in questioning assumptions, honesty in recognizing when you're suffering and being willing to investigate why. It offers no salvation from outside, no deity to grant you enlightenment, no ritual that will magically transform you. It offers only this, a path of investigation, a set of practices that can help you see clearly, and the assurance that what you seek is not distant but near, not in the future, but now, not somewhere else, but here, in this very moment of existence. Let yourself rest in this moment now, without needing it to be different, without waiting for some other moment when you'll finally be ready, finally be worthy, finally be enlightened. This moment is it. This presence is it. This awareness is it. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. You are already home, already complete, already free. The seeking itself is the only thing that obscures this recognition. And even the seeking is okay. Part of the process, part of the dream. Not a mistake, but a necessary journey that eventually reveals it was never necessary at all. Sleep tonight as awareness itself, not as a person trying to sleep, but as the presence in which sleep occurs, the space in which consciousness transitions from waking to dreaming, to deep rest and back again. You are not any of these states. You are what holds them all. What remains constant through all changes, what has always been here and always will be, the eternal now that knows no time, the infinite presence that knows no boundary, the awareness that is your deepest nature, your truest self, your original face before your parents were born. Rest as this. Be this. You already are this. Let go of everything else, all the seeking, all the becoming, all the struggling to be someone, to get somewhere, to achieve something. Just be. Just this. Just now. Nothing more needed. Nothing more required. This is the religion of no religion, the path of no path, the teaching that points beyond itself to what you have always been, inviting you home to yourself, to the peace that passes understanding, to the freedom that was never lost, only temporarily forgotten. May you rest deeply, completely, without resistance or grasping, allowing sleep to come as it will, allowing dreams to arise and pass as they do, allowing all of life to unfold as it must, while you remain as you are. Awareness itself, presence itself, being itself, the Buddha nature that has never been absent, never been defiled, never been less than complete. This is the teaching. This is the path. This is the destination that was never distant. Just this, just now, just being, complete.